In Los Angeles, a place to park is fast becoming a place to start over for thousands of people there living in RVs. CBS's Danya Backus shows us how some are finding safety, stability, and hope.
Homelessness in America isn't coming. It's already here. In 2026, tents, cars, and RVs aren't signs of disaster anymore. They're part of everyday life. These aren't people who gave up. They're working families, seniors, and children pushed out by a system that quietly stopped working. What you're about to see isn't opinion. It's the reality millions are living right now. Homelessness in America has reached levels unthinkable just a decade ago. In 2026, national estimates placed the homeless population at over 900,000 people, with independent housing analysts warning the real number may exceed 1.1 million when vehicle dwellers and uncounted rural cases are included. Unlike past waves, this crisis is not isolated to major cities. It is now visible in every state, spreading into suburbs, small towns, and highway corridors across the nation. What makes 2026 different is visibility. Tents line freeway on-ramps, vehicles fill industrial zones overnight, and entire neighborhoods now coexist with informal encampments. Cities such as Los Angeles, Phoenix, Austin, Tampa, and Philadelphia report double-digit year-over-year increases in their homeless populations, while states once considered affordable are seeing record homelessness growth for the first time in their history. The traditional image of homelessness no longer applies. In many regions, 1 in 3 homeless individuals now lives in a vehicle, not on the street. RVs, vans, and cars have become the last barrier between housing and total displacement. School districts report tens of thousands of homeless students, and hospitals report longer emergency stays due to lack of safe discharge options for patients with nowhere to go. This is no longer a temporary emergency. It is a structural failure. Housing supply has not kept up with population growth, wages have not kept up with rent, and safety nets were never designed for this scale. By 2026, homelessness is no longer hidden or temporary. It is a permanent and growing feature of the American landscape, touching communities that never imagined facing this crisis. One of the most alarming shifts in 2026 is the rapid rise of the working homeless. Data from housing advocacy groups shows that over 40% of homeless adults are now employed, either full-time or part-time. These are not people disconnected from society. They are warehouse workers, healthcare aides, delivery drivers, retail employees, and service staff who simply cannot afford housing where they work. In many metropolitan areas, the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment now exceeds $1,800 to $2,400 per month, while median wages remain under $25 per hour. That gap has created a situation where working full-time is no longer enough to remain housed. A single missed paycheck, unexpected medical bill, or car repair can trigger immediate displacement into homelessness. Gig economy workers are especially vulnerable. Irregular income, lack of benefits, and algorithm-driven scheduling mean earnings fluctuate wildly month to month. Without savings buffers, eviction becomes almost inevitable. Once displaced, regaining housing is extremely difficult due to credit damage, application fees, and strict income verification requirements that working homeless individuals struggle to meet. Employers quietly acknowledge the problem exists. Reports from logistics hubs and retail corridors reveal employees sleeping in parking lots or commuting hours from vehicles just to maintain their jobs. Some companies unofficially tolerate car living because replacing workers has become increasingly difficult in tight labor markets. This marks a historic break from the past. Homelessness is no longer driven primarily by unemployment or addiction. In 2026, it is driven by the fundamental mismatch between wages and housing costs, turning stable employment into a fragile illusion rather than real economic security for millions of workers. Rent inflation is the single largest mechanical force behind the homelessness surge in 2026. Nationally, rents have increased 30 to 45% since 2020. With certain metro areas experiencing increases exceeding 60%. During the same period, median wages rose by less than 15%, creating a widening affordability gap that millions of Americans cannot bridge. Housing experts use the 30% rule. Spending more than 30% of income on rent indicates housing stress. In 2026, over half of renter households exceed that threshold. Nearly 25% now spend more than 50% of their income just to stay housed. That leaves little room for emergencies, healthcare, transportation, or basic necessities. Rent increases are no longer tied to property improvements or demand alone. Corporate ownership of rental housing has expanded rapidly, with large firms acquiring single-family homes, apartment complexes, and mobile home parks across the country. Algorithmic pricing models now push rents upward in lockstep, reducing competition and locking tenants into unsustainable costs with no market alternatives. Once tenants fall behind on rent, eviction follows quickly. Late fees, legal costs, and judgment records make future housing access harder, even if income recovers. Many displaced renters report being denied housing repeatedly due to past evictions, effectively trapping them in homelessness with no pathway back to stable housing. In 2026, rent inflation is not just a financial issue, it is a displacement engine. It quietly converts housed families into homeless households, not through sudden economic collapse, but through relentless monthly pressure that eventually breaks even careful budgets and stable lives. Economic instability plays a critical role in the 2026 homelessness crisis. Over the past 2 years, the U.S. economy has seen millions of layoffs across tech, logistics, retail, healthcare support, and manufacturing sectors. Unlike past recessions, many of these jobs are not returning, replaced permanently by automation, outsourcing, or corporate consolidation. The danger lies in timing and savings. Most American households have less than $1,000 in emergency savings. When layoffs occur, housing becomes the first and most immediate risk. Unemployment benefits often cover only a fraction of rent and take weeks to process. By the time assistance arrives, eviction proceedings may already be underway, leaving families with limited options. Job instability does not only mean complete job loss. Reduced hours, forced contract shifts, and unpredictable scheduling leave workers technically employed but financially unstable. This soft unemployment is harder to measure statistically but deeply destructive to housing security. Landlords rarely adjust rent expectations to reflect income volatility or part-time status. Regions dependent on single industries are hit hardest by displacement waves. When distribution centers relocate or hospitals cut support staff positions, entire communities face cascading housing loss within months. Local shelters and aid programs become overwhelmed quickly, unable to absorb the sudden influx. In 2026, homelessness is increasingly tied to economic shocks rather than long-term poverty or personal failure. A stable middle-class life can unravel in weeks, not years. Once housing is lost, regaining it requires steady income, good credit, security deposits, and proven stability. These are precisely the things layoffs destroy, creating a trap most cannot escape. Vehicle and RV homelessness has become one of the fastest-growing segments of the homeless population in 2026. Estimates suggest over 300,000 people now live in cars, vans, or RVs nationwide, a figure that has more than doubled since 2018. For many families and individuals, this is not a lifestyle choice or adventure, but a last defensive move before street homelessness. Vehicles offer privacy, mobility, and perceived safety that shelters cannot provide. Families use them to keep children out of dangerous shelter environments. Workers use them to stay close to jobs without paying impossible rents. Seniors use RVs after being priced out of fixed housing on limited incomes. But this informal solution is rapidly collapsing under legal pressure. Cities across the country are enforcing overnight parking bans, vehicle habitation laws, strict time limits, and aggressive towing policies. Fines can reach $100 to $500 per citation, and impound fees often exceed $1,000, instantly stripping people of their only shelter and belongings in one enforcement action. RV living has also become financially unsustainable for most households. Insurance, repairs, registration fees, and fuel costs now rival apartment rent in many areas. Meanwhile, RV parks raise rates annually or ban older units entirely, forcing long-term residents back into urban streets with nowhere legal to park. What was once an informal safety valve is now being systematically closed. In 2026, vehicle homelessness is no longer tolerated by authorities, yet no alternative housing exists for displaced vehicle dwellers. The result is a growing population pushed from wheels to sidewalks, accelerating the visible street crisis instead of containing it. In 2026, homelessness is no longer just a social issue. It is increasingly treated as a criminal offense across America. Over 70% of major U.S. cities now enforce some form of anti-camping, anti-sleeping, or vehicle habitation law. These policies include overnight parking bans, sidewalk sleeping prohibitions, coordinated encampment sweeps, and strict restrictions on RV living within city limits. The impact is severe and far-reaching. Citations often range from $50 to $500 per violation, amounts impossible for homeless individuals to pay. Failure to pay leads to arrest warrants, jail time, or additional fines, creating a legal cycle that permanently damages a person's ability to regain housing or employment. In some cities, police conduct coordinated sweeps that displace hundreds of people in a single day, destroying tents, important documents, medications, and irreplaceable personal belongings. Court rulings intended to protect the homeless are increasingly ignored or narrowly interpreted by local governments. Cities argue that shelters exist, even when those shelters are full, unsafe, inaccessible, or exclude families and pets. As a result, homelessness is pushed from visible downtown areas into industrial zones, riverbeds, and unsafe outskirts rather than actually solved. Criminalization does not reduce homelessness numbers. Multiple studies show it actually increases public spending, with enforcement costing cities tens of thousands of dollars per person annually, far more than permanent housing solutions would cost. In 2026, cities are not ending homelessness through these policies. They are managing visibility, pushing people from block to block, while the underlying housing crisis continues to grow worse. Enforcement has become policy, replacing actual solutions. One of the fastest growing homeless populations in 2026 is elderly Americans. Adults aged 55 and older now represent over 25% of the total homeless population, a figure that has nearly doubled since 2015. Many rely entirely on fixed incomes such as Social Security, which averages under $1,900 per month, far below market rents in most regions of the country. Rising medical costs compound the housing problem dramatically. Prescription drugs, mobility aids, and chronic care management leave little money remaining for housing expenses. When rents rise or property taxes increase on rental properties, seniors often have no financial flexibility whatsoever. Once displaced, elderly individuals face extreme risks, including exposure, dangerous falls, untreated illness, and significantly increased early mortality. Disabled Americans face similar crushing challenges. Many receive disability benefits capped well below actual housing costs, and waiting lists for supportive housing leave people stranded for years without assistance. Shelters often lack basic accessibility features, forcing disabled individuals to remain unsheltered on streets rather than access inadequate facilities. RV and vehicle living has become increasingly common among seniors seeking affordable shelter, but recent crackdowns remove even that fragile option. Outreach workers report rising numbers of elderly individuals sleeping in cars, storage units, or abandoned buildings without heat or sanitation. This is not a fringe issue affecting only a few. Demographers warn that aging populations combined with severe housing shortages will push elderly homelessness even higher through the late 2000s. In 2026, retirement no longer guarantees stability or dignity. For millions of seniors, it increasingly signals vulnerability and the real possibility of losing housing permanently. Homelessness in 2026 increasingly affects entire families, not just individuals. School districts across the country report over 1.3 million homeless students, including children living in shelters, cars, RVs, budget motels, or doubled-up housing with relatives. These numbers represent a quiet emergency rarely visible on the streets, but deeply impacting communities. Families often avoid traditional shelters due to legitimate safety concerns, family separation rules, or simple lack of space. Many rotate constantly between parking lots, relatives' couches, and temporary motel stays paid for night by night. This chronic instability disrupts education, healthcare access, and emotional development. Children in these situations experience significantly higher rates of anxiety, depression, and academic decline. The cost burden is crushing for homeless families. Childcare, food, and transportation expenses collide with rising rents and stagnant wages, leaving families one crisis away from complete displacement. Once evicted, families face active discrimination when applying for new housing, especially with young children in tow. Homeless families are also significantly harder to count in official statistics. They blend into communities, making the crisis appear smaller than it actually is. But educators and pediatric clinics see the devastating effects daily. Exhaustion, hunger, chronic absenteeism, and developmental delays rising sharply among student populations. In 2026, homelessness is no longer an individual failure or personal choice. It is a widespread family crisis, shaping the next generation in ways that will ripple through society for decades. Children experiencing homelessness today face lifelong consequences from instability during critical developmental years, perpetuating cycles of poverty and displacement. Emergency shelters were never designed to handle the massive scale of homelessness seen in 2026. Nationwide, shelter capacity meets less than half of total need, leaving hundreds of thousands of people completely unsheltered each night. In some major cities, waiting lists stretch for months or even years, rendering shelters irrelevant as actual emergency solutions. Conditions inside shelters often drive people away rather than providing refuge. Overcrowding, theft, violence, strict curfews, and complete lack of privacy make shelters unsafe or unworkable for families, seniors, and workers maintaining jobs. Many shelters also prohibit pets, vehicles, or couples, forcing people to choose between accessing shelter and keeping families or animals together. Chronic funding shortages worsen the operational problem significantly. Staffing levels fail to meet overwhelming demand, and burnout among social workers is widespread across the sector. Temporary shelters open during winter crises only to close months later, creating instability rather than continuity of care. Shelters also do little to solve long-term housing challenges. Most offer short-term stays without clear exit pathways, simply cycling people back onto the streets after time limits expire. In 2026, shelters function as pressure valves, not solutions. They absorb overflow without actually reducing homelessness itself. The shelter-first model has failed at scale. What began as emergency infrastructure has become permanent but inadequate. People cycle through the same beds year after year without pathways to housing. Staff exhaust themselves managing crisis without resolution. In 2026, the shelter system is not a solution to homelessness. It is a holding pattern that manages symptoms while the underlying crisis grows worse. Mental health and addiction are deeply intertwined with homelessness in 2026, but the relationship is widely misunderstood. Recent studies show that housing loss frequently precedes mental health decline, not the other way around. Trauma from displacement, chronic instability, and constant survival stress exacerbate existing conditions and trigger entirely new mental health crises. Once homeless, access to treatment becomes extremely difficult or impossible. Clinics require stable addresses, insurance coverage, scheduled appointments, and reliable transportation. These are barriers many homeless individuals simply cannot overcome. Emergency rooms become default mental health providers, dramatically increasing costs while delivering minimal continuity of care. Substance use often emerges as a coping mechanism rather than an original cause. Living outdoors or in vehicles exposes people to violence, severe sleep deprivation, and chronic fear. Without professional support systems, self-medication becomes common and addiction develops. Criminalization actively worsens mental health outcomes. Arrests and citations disrupt fragile treatment relationships, sever connections with outreach workers, and push people further from potential recovery. In 2026, the system punishes visible symptoms instead of addressing root causes or providing actual care. Homeless individuals with mental illness face compounding disadvantages. They are more vulnerable to violence, less able to navigate bureaucratic systems, and more likely to be criminalized for visible behaviors. Meanwhile, mental health beds have been cut drastically over decades, leaving nowhere for people in crisis to receive care. Homelessness is not fundamentally a mental health crisis. It is a housing crisis that creates mental health emergencies at massive scale. Stable housing, not treatment alone, is the foundation for mental health recovery. Without housing first, treatment efforts repeatedly fail. Homelessness in 2026 is no longer concentrated exclusively in big cities. rural and small-town America is experiencing a sharp but largely invisible rise in homelessness. Unlike urban areas with shelters and outreach, rural communities often lack emergency housing, social workers, or affordable rentals altogether. As a result, homelessness in these regions is significantly undercounted in national statistics. In many rural counties, housing vacancy rates are below 3%, and wages remain tied to agriculture, warehousing, or seasonal work. When housing is unavailable, displaced residents have literally nowhere to go. Families sleep in vehicles, sheds, campers, or dangerously overcrowded homes without being officially recorded as homeless. Healthcare access is severely limited in rural areas, and social services may be hours away by car. Public transportation is often completely non-existent, making it nearly impossible to reach assistance programs even when they exist. School districts report growing numbers of students commuting long distances from unstable living situations without support. Rural homelessness challenges the persistent myth that leaving expensive cities solves housing insecurity. In 2026, housing scarcity is truly national. Small towns now face the same crushing pressures as metro areas, but without any infrastructure to respond. The invisible nature of rural homelessness makes policy responses harder. Without shelter counts or visible encampments, the crisis does not register politically. People disappear into forests, abandoned properties, and vehicles scattered across vast distances. In 2026, rural America faces a homeless crisis it cannot see, measure, or address with existing resources. The U.S. housing supply crisis is a central structural driver of homelessness in 2026. Housing experts estimate the nation faces a shortage of over 7 million affordable rental units for low-income and moderate-income households. New construction overwhelmingly targets luxury or high-income renters, leaving the bottom half of earners with rapidly shrinking housing options. Restrictive zoning laws block multifamily housing in large portions of cities and suburbs. Single-family-only zoning prevents density exactly where it is most needed. At the same time, aging affordable units are demolished or converted into higher rent properties, further reducing available inventory. Manufactured housing and mobile home parks, once an affordable alternative for millions, are rapidly disappearing. Corporate acquisitions of these parks often lead to immediate rent hikes of 20 to 40%, displacing long-term residents who cannot afford increases. The result is a severe housing bottleneck. Even those with steady income cannot find housing they qualify for or can afford. Waiting lists for subsidized housing stretch 5 to 10 years in many regions. In 2026, homelessness is not caused by lack of individual effort. It is caused by lack of available housing. Without massive construction of affordable housing, the crisis will only worsen. Market rate development alone cannot solve this. Profit-driven construction targets the highest income renters, leaving everyone else competing for shrinking inventory. In 2026, the housing supply crisis is not a future threat. It is the present reality driving displacement at scale across every state. Evictions are one of the fastest and most direct pathways into homelessness in 2026. Court records show millions of eviction filings annually across the country, with the majority involving rent arrears under $2,000. Once an eviction is formally filed, even if later resolved, it permanently damages a renter's future housing prospects. Many tenants lack legal representation in court. In most jurisdictions, landlords appear with experienced attorneys while tenants face proceedings alone without legal knowledge. A single missed hearing can result in immediate removal and a judgment on record. After eviction, application rejections multiply, required deposits increase dramatically, and housing options vanish. Eviction court backlogs mean cases often drag on for months, prolonging uncertainty and extreme stress. Families often abandon units early to avoid formal judgments, entering homelessness without official displacement records that would make them eligible for assistance. Once evicted, the barriers to re-entry are severe. Background checks flag eviction records. Landlords reject applications automatically. Even low-income housing programs exclude people with recent evictions. The system effectively creates permanent housing exclusion from a single financial crisis. Eviction moratoria during emergencies provide temporary relief, but do not address underlying rent debt. When protections expire, mass evictions follow in waves, overwhelming courts and aid programs simultaneously. Evictions are not just individual legal actions. They are displacement machines operating at industrial scale. In 2026, the eviction system quietly produces homelessness one filing at a time, converting housed families into homeless households through a legal process most cannot navigate or afford to fight. By 2026, homelessness has become one of the most emotionally charged issues in American communities. As encampments grow more visible, public frustration has intensified dramatically. Surveys show that over 60% of residents in major metro areas believe homelessness has gotten significantly worse in their neighborhoods within just the last 2 years. Complaints to city councils, police departments, and neighborhood associations have surged. Businesses report revenue losses tied to declining foot traffic, while residents cite safety concerns, whether statistically real or based on perception. This mounting pressure fuels rapid response policies including encampment sweeps, defensive fencing, hostile architecture, and zero-tolerance enforcement. These actions are often driven by complaint volume rather than long-term strategic planning. The result is deepening social fracture. Housed residents feel abandoned by leadership and unsafe in their communities. Homeless individuals feel hunted, dehumanized, and pushed from place to place. Trust erodes on all sides. Studies show that encampment removals displace people an average of 3 to 5 miles, breaking access to jobs, schools, clinics, and outreach workers. Instead of stabilizing communities, backlash accelerates instability. Neighborhoods cycle through repeated displacement without resolution. Public anger grows because the visible problem never actually disappears. It simply moves. In 2026, homelessness becomes a catalyst for polarization and breakdown. Communities are forced into conflict not because of personal failures, but because housing systems no longer function. When human survival is treated as a public nuisance, social cohesion collapses alongside housing security. The result is division, fear, and failed policy on all sides. Government spending on homelessness has reached historic highs, yet measurable results continue to worsen. Federal, state, and local governments now spend tens of billions of dollars annually on homelessness-related programs. However, the overwhelming majority of funding is directed toward emergency responses rather than permanent housing solutions. Emergency shelters, temporary hotel programs, and enforcement operations consume large portions of budgets without reducing homelessness. In some cities, the annual cost to manage a single chronically homeless individual through emergency services exceeds $60,000 per year, far more than permanent supportive housing would cost. Bureaucratic delays undermine progress significantly. Housing projects often require 5 to 10 years to move from approval to actual occupancy due to zoning disputes, environmental reviews, and complex funding restrictions. Meanwhile, homelessness grows month by month. Strict funding rules exclude many people who need help. Undocumented individuals, vehicle dwellers, and those without formal diagnoses often cannot access aid. Programs measure success by beds created or encampments cleared, not by long-term housing stability achieved. In 2026, the fundamental issue is not lack of money. It is misaligned priorities and failed strategies. Governments manage homelessness instead of ending it. The system reacts to visibility, not displacement. Spending rises while housing outcomes fall, a clear signal that current strategies are structurally flawed. Without redirecting resources toward permanent housing construction and rental assistance, spending will continue increasing while homelessness grows. In 2026, the failure is not financial. It is strategic, political, and systemic. Money alone cannot solve a crisis rooted in policy failure. If current trends continue unchecked, homelessness will become a permanent and normalized feature of American life. Projections suggest that without major structural reform, the homeless population could exceed 1.3 million people before the end of the decade, with vehicle homelessness becoming the dominant and most visible form. Children raised without stable housing face severe long-term consequences. Studies show homeless youth are 3 times more likely to experience chronic health issues and twice as likely to struggle with long-term employment stability. This creates generational instability rather than recovery, perpetuating cycles of poverty. Cities will continue adapting defensively rather than constructively. More public spaces will be redesigned specifically to discourage rest or shelter. More laws will regulate human presence instead of providing actual shelter. Entire zones may become exclusionary by design, pushing homelessness into shrinking areas. The economic cost will surge dramatically. Emergency room use, policing, sanitation, and crisis services already cost taxpayers billions annually. Without housing solutions, those costs will multiply exponentially while producing no stability or improvement. Homelessness in 2026 is not an endpoint or peak. It is a warning. Without large-scale affordable housing construction, meaningful rent stabilization, wage-to-cost alignment, and eviction reform, displacement will become a standard American life phase rather than a rare exception. The future is being actively shaped right now, and the consequences will last for decades. The path forward requires political will, not just funding. Without it, the America of 2030 will look nothing like the nation of 2020. Homelessness will define cities, reshape communities, and damage entire generations. This isn't a temporary crisis. It's the direction the country is moving.
Our team coverage continues now with U.S. Supreme Court ruling cities can arrest and fine those who are homeless if they sleep outside. The High Court handing down that ruling today, siding with the town of Grants Pass, Oregon, and its anti-camping ordinances.
Right now, in one of the richest countries in the world, working families are being pushed out of their homes and into parking lots, and now even those are being taken away. This isn't a housing shortage anymore. It's a survival crisis, and it's spreading faster than anyone wants to admit. California has become ground zero for RV homelessness enforcement in America. With over 180,000 unhoused residents and an estimated 72,000 people living in vehicles, the state has more vehicle dwellers than any other in the country. Cities like Los Angeles, San Diego, San Jose, and Oakland have become testing grounds for aggressive new policies. Since 2023, more than 40 California cities have passed or expanded overnight parking bans. Many restrict parking to just 2 to 4 hours, even in industrial areas. Violations can lead to fines ranging from $75 to $500, with towing fees often exceeding $2,000. Los Angeles alone issued over 35,000 vehicle habitation citations in 2024. San Diego doubled its towing budget to $15 million. San Jose expanded its no overnight zones by 60%. At the state level, lawmakers tied homelessness funding to enforcement cooperation. Cities that clear RV zones receive priority grants for cleanup and infrastructure projects. Fire risk is frequently cited as justification. California reported over 1,400 RV-related fires in 2024, strengthening political support for removals. But housing supply hasn't kept pace with demand. The state is short over 1.2 million affordable housing units. Only 1 in 4 displaced RV residents is offered temporary shelter after removal. For many Californians, living in an RV has shifted from a survival strategy to criminal status almost overnight. The enforcement infrastructure continues expanding while housing alternatives remain scarce. This combination has created a system where working families and displaced individuals face constant citations, mounting debt, and nowhere legal to park. Oregon's RV crisis is shaped by a unique combination of city enforcement and federal land closures. Portland, Eugene, and Medford have expanded anti-camping and vehicle dwelling rules since 2023. Portland alone cleared over 600 encampment sites in 2024, affecting thousands of RV residents. At the same time, federal agencies including the Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management began closing long-term vehicle encampments on public land. These areas had served as informal safe zones for years. Between 2023 and 2025, more than 15 major federal sites were shut down across Oregon. Court battles quickly followed. Advocacy groups sued cities over sweep policies, arguing that shelter shortages made enforcement unconstitutional. While some cases temporarily slowed removals, most were eventually dismissed. Oregon spends over $2 billion annually on homelessness, yet only 18% goes toward permanent housing construction. The rest funds emergency response and enforcement operations. Vehicle dwellers now face pressure from both directions. Cities restrict parking in urban areas, while rural federal land is increasingly off-limits. As a result, people are pushed into smaller and more dangerous locations, including areas under bridges, flood zones, and remote highways. Oregon's system doesn't eliminate homelessness. Instead, it redistributes displaced people from one location to another without providing viable alternatives. The constant displacement disrupts employment, healthcare access, and family stability. Many RV residents report moving every few days to avoid citations, creating a cycle of instability that makes it nearly impossible to secure permanent housing or maintain steady work. Washington has become a national battleground over encampment enforcement policies. Seattle, Tacoma, and Spokane expanded vehicle dwelling restrictions after 2022. Seattle alone conducted over 1,200 encampment removals in 2024. RV zones were eliminated near schools, parks, and transit hubs. Signs reading, "No parking between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m." multiplied across the city. Enforcement budgets grew rapidly. Seattle spent $22 million on sweeps and towing in 1 year, more than on new shelter beds. Public backlash followed quickly. Advocacy groups pushed legislation to limit removals unless shelter was available. In 2025, lawmakers introduced restrictions on displacement without placement. But cities resisted, arguing that public safety required enforcement flexibility. Washington State Patrol also began targeting long-term RV parking near highways and rest areas, removing hundreds of vehicles from locations previously considered safe. The result is constant movement. Many RV residents must relocate every 48 to 72 hours to avoid tickets and towing. Surveys show that 62% of Washington vehicle dwellers have been displaced more than 5 times in 1 year. This cycle makes stability impossible. People struggle to maintain jobs when they must move constantly. Children miss school. Medical appointments are canceled. The stress of perpetual displacement compounds existing challenges. Washington's enforcement system has created a population in constant motion with no clear path to stability. While cities argue they're addressing public concerns, the displaced residents have nowhere to go. Shelter beds remain scarce, affordable housing construction lags far behind need, and the gap between enforcement and solutions continues widening. Arizona's approach to RV homelessness is shaped by state-level authority and extreme climate conditions. After court rulings in 2022 and 2023, Arizona expanded its anti-camping and vehicle habitation laws, giving cities stronger legal backing to remove encampments. Phoenix, Mesa, and Tucson now operate large-scale enforcement teams. Phoenix cleared over 1,500 sites in 2024 alone. Heat risk is a major justification officials cite. With summer temperatures regularly exceeding 115 degrees Fahrenheit, authorities argue that RV camps represent medical emergencies waiting to happen. But displacement actually makes heat exposure worse. After removals, many residents are pushed into desert outskirts with no shade, water, or services. Heat-related deaths among homeless people rose 35% from 2023 to 2025. Arizona also restricted camping on state trust land, eliminating thousands of informal parking spots that had provided refuge. Shelter capacity remains severely limited. Phoenix has beds for only 22% of its homeless population. Without housing alternatives, enforcement pushes people into genuinely life-threatening conditions. The desert environment means survival requires access to air conditioning, water, and shade. When RVs are removed from areas with these resources, residents face immediate danger. Many displaced people attempt to return to urban areas at night, creating a cycle of repeated enforcement. Citations accumulate, fines mount, and the path to stable housing becomes increasingly impossible. Arizona's enforcement system prioritizes removal over solutions. While officials cite safety concerns, the displacement itself creates the dangerous situations authorities claim to prevent. The result is a population trapped between enforcement pressure and environmental hazards with no legal place to exist. Texas doesn't have a single statewide RV policy. Instead, enforcement happens city by city, and it's spreading rapidly across the state. Austin, Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio have all expanded vehicle dwelling restrictions since 2023. Austin passed ordinances banning sleeping in vehicles in most residential and commercial zones. Dallas increased towing contracts by 40%. Houston added no overnight districts near major job centers. Texas cities issued over 28,000 camping and vehicle citations in 2024 alone. Unlike some states, Texas provides limited tenant-style protections for vehicle dwellers. Once cited, residents have few legal options or appeal processes available. Rest areas and park and ride lots were once considered safe zones. Now, many prohibit overnight stays entirely. Meanwhile, rents in major Texas cities rose 27% since 2020. Wages rose only 14%. Working families are being priced out of traditional housing and criminalized simultaneously for their survival strategies. Texas's decentralized approach means enforcement expands quietly, one city at a time, until no safe space remains. There's no coordinated state response, no statewide shelter system, and no unified housing strategy. The city-by-city model creates confusion and constant uncertainty. What's legal in one jurisdiction may be criminal in the next. RV residents must navigate a patchwork of local ordinances that change frequently. As enforcement spreads, displaced people move between cities seeking legal parking, only to find new restrictions awaiting them. The lack of statewide coordination means resources aren't pooled and solutions aren't standardized. Each city makes independent decisions, typically prioritizing removal over housing assistance. This fragmented system leaves RV residents with nowhere to turn. Florida's RV homelessness crisis is shaped by tourism economics, hurricanes, and aggressive local enforcement. With over 27 million visitors annually, coastal cities prioritize clean image policies. Miami, Tampa, Orlando, and Fort Lauderdale have expanded no camping and no overnight parking zones near beaches, resorts, and downtown districts. Since 2023, Florida cities have conducted more than 900 large-scale encampment sweeps. Miami-Dade County alone cleared over 200 RV clusters in 2 years. In 2024, Florida passed legislation strengthening penalties for public camping, allowing faster removals and higher fines. Some cities now issue citations within just 12 hours of notice. Hurricanes compound the crisis significantly. After Hurricane Ian and subsequent storms, thousands lost traditional housing and moved into RVs, but emergency parking zones closed within weeks of opening. Flooding and storm surges also destroy informal RV areas. Between 2022 and 2025, over 4,000 vehicle dwellers were displaced by storms. Shelter capacity remains severely limited. Florida has beds for only 19% of its homeless population. Many shelters close entirely during hurricane evacuations, leaving displaced people with nowhere to go. As a result, RV residents are pushed inland, away from coastal jobs and services. Many work in tourism, hospitality, and construction industries concentrated near beaches. In Florida, homelessness enforcement is tied directly to tourism revenue. Image protection comes before housing stability. Cities prioritize visitor experience over resident welfare, creating a system where working people who serve the tourism industry cannot afford to live near their jobs and face criminal penalties for parking overnight. The hurricane cycle adds unpredictable displacement, making stability impossible. Georgia's enforcement is driven largely by urban redevelopment priorities. Atlanta leads the state in RV and encampment removals. As new stadiums, tech hubs, and luxury apartments expanded, vehicle dwelling zones systematically disappeared. Between 2022 and 2025, Atlanta cleared over 350 major encampments, displacing thousands of RV residents. Many areas were rezoned for development immediately after sweeps, making return impossible. Georgia law allows cities to restrict camping on public land with extremely limited notice. In some districts, residents receive only 24 hours before removal and towing. Towing contracts grew sharply. Atlanta increased enforcement spending by 45% in 2 years. The state also expanded Highway Patrol Authority to remove long-term parked vehicles near interstates and exit ramps. Hundreds of RVs were removed from roadside zones that had been tolerated for years. Georgia's homeless population grew by 26% since 2020, while affordable housing construction fell by 18%. The gap between need and supply continues widening. Shelter beds are concentrated in downtown areas. Suburban zones offer almost no alternatives for displaced residents. When sweeps happen, people are pushed farther from public transit, healthcare facilities, and employment centers. Georgia's approach reflects a larger national trend: development first, displacement second, housing solutions last. The economic priorities of real estate development take precedence over human needs. As Atlanta positions itself as a growing tech and business hub, the pressure on low-income residents intensifies. RV dwellers represent visible poverty in areas targeted for upscale transformation. Their removal serves aesthetic and economic goals rather than addressing the underlying housing crisis that created vehicle homelessness in the first place. Colorado's RV enforcement is driven by climate concerns and tourism economics. Denver, Boulder, Colorado Springs, and mountain resort towns have expanded restrictions on vehicle dwelling since 2023. Denver alone removed over 1,000 vehicle encampments in 2024. Boulder banned overnight parking in most zones, reducing legal parking options by 70%. Officials cite wildfire risk, propane storage dangers, and blocked snow routes as reasons for removals. Winter plowing access is frequently used to justify emergency clearing operations, but displacement creates severe cold exposure risks. In winter 2024, temperatures dropped below -15 degrees Fahrenheit in parts of Colorado. Homeless outreach teams recorded a 41% increase in hypothermia cases following major sweeps. Many RV residents are pushed into high-altitude areas without electrical hookups or water access. Heating fuel costs can exceed $200 per month, completely unaffordable for most vehicle dwellers. Tourism also drives enforcement. Ski towns restrict RV parking to preserve visitor experience and maintain upscale aesthetics. Seasonal bans are common in resort areas. Colorado spends over $450 million annually on homelessness programs, yet less than 30% goes toward long-term housing construction. The rest funds enforcement operations and emergency response. In mountain states like Colorado, displacement often means survival against nature itself. Sub-zero temperatures turn enforcement into a potential death sentence for those without shelter alternatives. The mountain environment makes vehicle living particularly dangerous. Altitude increases cold stress. Snow restricts movement, and emergency services may be hours away. When enforcement removes RVs from urban areas with some infrastructure, people face immediate survival challenges in harsh conditions with no support systems. Nevada's enforcement is heavily concentrated around Las Vegas and Reno. Las Vegas hosts over 40 million tourists annually, making image control central to policy decisions. Clark County expanded no habitation zones around the Strip, stadiums, and convention centers. RV parking within miles of major venues is completely prohibited overnight. Since 2023, Las Vegas removed over 2,500 vehicles from public areas. Reno followed a similar path, clearing riverfront and industrial zones to attract development and investment. Nevada law allows rapid enforcement for public nuisance violations. Removal notices can be as short as 24 hours, giving residents almost no time to relocate or challenge citations. Water scarcity is also cited as justification. Officials argue that unauthorized RV settlements strain limited infrastructure in the desert environment. But Nevada's shelter system is one of the smallest per capita in the western United States. Only 16% of homeless residents can access shelter beds on any given night. Desert relocation dramatically increases health risks. Summer temperatures regularly exceed 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Vehicle interiors reach lethal levels within hours. Heat-related deaths among the homeless in Clark County rose 38% between 2022 and 2025. Nevada's tourism economy directly drives policy decisions, and RV residents pay the price with their health and safety. The casino and convention industries generate billions in revenue. Officials prioritize maintaining an upscale image for visitors, while the workers who support that economy cannot afford housing. Enforcement removes visible poverty from tourist corridors, but offers no alternative housing, creating a population constantly displaced in one of America's most dangerous climates. Utah's enforcement reflects a combination of conservative governance and severely limited housing stock. Salt Lake City, Provo, and Ogden expanded anti-camping and vehicle dwelling laws after 2023. Overnight parking is now banned in most residential and commercial zones. Salt Lake City cleared over 600 encampments in 2024 alone, many involving RVs and other vehicles. Utah emphasizes what officials call compassionate enforcement, offering shelter before removal. But capacity is extremely low. The state has beds for only 21% of its homeless population. Many shelters are faith-based, requiring participation in religious programs and services. Some RV residents decline these requirements, leaving them ineligible for the limited assistance available. Housing costs have risen dramatically. Since 2020, rents increased 31%, while median income rose only 13%. The gap between wages and housing costs continues widening. Utah also restricts long-term parking near churches, schools, and government buildings, eliminating traditional safe zones where RVs had previously been tolerated. Winter adds additional pressure. Sub-zero temperatures push authorities to clear camps for safety reasons, even without housing alternatives. Officials argue they're protecting people from freezing, but displacement often increases exposure to dangerous cold. Utah's system relies heavily on moral framing, encouraging compliance without providing enough actual exits from homelessness. The religious influence shapes both the rhetoric and the limited services available. The result is polite displacement, repeated endlessly. Authorities use compassionate language while implementing policies that create constant movement. The emphasis on personal responsibility and faith-based solutions cannot address the structural housing shortage that drives vehicle homelessness in the first place. Idaho's enforcement expanded rapidly after national court rulings weakened legal protections for homeless residents. Cities like Boise, Meridian, and Nampa passed stricter anti-camping and vehicle habitation ordinances between 2023 and 2025. Boise alone issued over 4,800 camping and vehicle citations in 2024. Before these legal changes, riverbanks, industrial zones, and public lands served as informal RV parking areas. Most of these locations have now been closed to overnight use. State land agencies increased patrols by 32%, specifically targeting long-term vehicle dwellers on trust land and wildlife management areas. Idaho's homeless population grew by 29% since 2020, while affordable housing construction dropped by 21%. The gap between need and supply continues expanding. Shelter capacity remains severely limited. Only 17% of unhoused residents can access beds on any given night. Cold weather is a major factor in Idaho's crisis. Winter temperatures frequently fall below 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Outreach teams recorded a 36% increase in frostbite and cold-related injuries immediately following major sweeps. Rural displacement is common. When Boise clears RV zones, many residents relocate to remote highways and forest edges where emergency services are scarce or non-existent. Idaho's approach emphasizes law and order over housing investment, leaving RV residents with fewer legal and physical safe spaces each year. The court rulings gave cities broader authority to remove encampments without providing shelter alternatives first. Idaho quickly exercised this authority, implementing aggressive enforcement while shelter construction lagged far behind. The combination of legal changes, harsh winter climate, and limited housing options creates life-threatening situations for displaced vehicle dwellers. Michigan's RV homelessness crisis is tied directly to long-term industrial decline and rising housing costs. Detroit, Flint, Grand Rapids, and Lansing have expanded enforcement using parking codes and nuisance laws rather than direct anti-camping bans. Detroit issued more than 6,200 parking and habitation citations in 2024 specifically targeting vehicle dwellers. Grand Rapids increased towing operations by 28%. Officials frame removals as neighborhood protection and blight reduction rather than homelessness enforcement, using legal language that avoids constitutional challenges. But economic reality tells a different story. Since 2020, Michigan rents increased 24%, while manufacturing wages rose only 11%. Thousands of laid-off auto workers and warehouse employees turned to vehicles for housing. Winter is deadly in Michigan. The state recorded over 90 cold-related deaths among unhoused residents between 2023 and 2025. Many RV residents cluster near factories and logistics hubs to maintain employment access. When these zones are cleared through parking enforcement, people lose both shelter and job proximity simultaneously. Shelter availability is extremely limited outside Detroit. Rural counties often have 0 emergency beds available. Michigan spends less than 0.4% of its state budget on homelessness programs, among the lowest rates in the Midwest region. As a result, enforcement far outpaces assistance. Cities remove RVs faster than housing solutions can develop. The industrial decline that drove Michigan's economic struggles continues impacting working families. Manufacturing job losses created initial housing instability, and parking code enforcement criminalizes the survival strategies people adopted. Without addressing the economic roots or investing in housing, Michigan's approach simply moves poverty from one location to another. Pennsylvania's RV enforcement is concentrated in Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and surrounding suburbs. Philadelphia cleared over 450 encampments in 2024, many involving vehicle dwellers. Parking restrictions expanded dramatically around transit corridors and redevelopment zones. SEPTA and city police increased patrols near train stations, removing long-term parked RVs to maintain what officials call commuter safety and station aesthetics. Pittsburgh followed similar policies, especially near hospitals, universities, and medical district expansion areas. Between 2022 and 2025, parking-related citations specifically targeting vehicle residents rose 41% statewide. Housing costs are rising rapidly across Pennsylvania. Rents increased 26% since 2020, while median wages rose only 14%. The gap continues widening each year. At the same time, the state lost over 9,000 public housing units due to aging infrastructure and lack of maintenance funding. Shelters are severely overcrowded. Philadelphia's average shelter occupancy exceeds 96% year-round, leaving almost no availability for newly displaced people. Suburban counties provide few alternatives, forcing displaced residents to return to cities repeatedly. Many RV dwellers work in healthcare, food service, and logistics industries. Displacement disrupts not only housing, but employment arrangements and childcare access. Pennsylvania's transit-focused enforcement prioritizes mobility infrastructure and commercial activity over housing security. The emphasis on clearing areas near public transportation means people lose access to the very transit systems they need for work. Pushing RVs away from stations forces longer commutes or complete job loss. The transit-oriented approach reflects broader priorities. Economic activity and commuter convenience take precedence over the housing needs of working poor residents who often serve those same transit-dependent commuters. Ohio's enforcement relies heavily on public safety and health codes rather than direct camping bans. Columbus, Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Dayton expanded nuisance and sanitation ordinances between 2023 and 2025. Columbus removed over 700 encampments in 2024 alone. Cleveland increased vehicle towing by 34%, specifically targeting RVs and converted vans. Cities cite trash accumulation, fire risk, and flooding concerns along riverbanks and highway underpasses as primary justifications for enforcement. But Ohio's housing shortage is severe. The state lacks over 260,000 affordable housing units, creating impossible pressure on low-income residents. Rents rose 23% since 2020, while wages rose only 12%. The income gap makes traditional housing increasingly unattainable. Many displaced RV residents move constantly between industrial zones, rest areas, and abandoned parking lots, seeking any temporary refuge. Flooding is a major risk in Ohio. In 2025, heavy rains displaced over 1,200 homeless residents along Ohio River corridors, destroying vehicles and belongings. Shelter coverage remains extremely low. Only 20% of homeless residents can access beds on any given night. Ohio's system emphasizes compliance and cleanup operations without addressing root causes of homelessness. The result is constant movement with no pathway out of vehicle dwelling. Health code enforcement sounds less punitive than camping bans, but achieves the same displacement effect. By framing enforcement as public health protection rather than homeless removal, cities avoid constitutional challenges while achieving the same goal. RV residents face citations regardless of legal terminology. The emphasis on sanitation and safety allows cities to clear areas quickly while claiming to protect both housed residents and the displaced population itself. North Carolina's RV homelessness crisis is driven by rapid population growth and restrictive zoning laws. Charlotte, Raleigh, Durham, and Asheville expanded parking and camping bans after 2023. Overnight parking is prohibited in most suburban zones. Charlotte cleared over 300 encampments in 2024 alone. Raleigh doubled enforcement staffing to handle increased sweep operations. As tech sector and finance jobs expanded, housing costs surged dramatically. Rents increased 29% since 2020, while entry-level wages rose only 13%. Zoning laws severely restrict mobile home parks and RV parks, limiting legal alternatives for low-income residents. North Carolina lost over 40% of its low-cost trailer parks since 2000 due to redevelopment pressure. Hurricane displacement also plays a significant role. Storms in eastern counties pushed thousands into temporary RV living as emergency housing. But emergency parking zones closed within months, leaving displaced families with nowhere to go. Shelter capacity is extremely uneven across the state. Rural counties often have zero emergency beds available. As cities grow wealthier through job growth and development, physical space for low-income residents systematically disappears. North Carolina's enforcement reflects a broader pattern: economic growth without inclusion. The jobs created don't pay enough for workers to afford housing in the same cities where they're employed. The rapid transformation means longtime residents and service workers are priced out simultaneously. Zoning restrictions prevent affordable housing development, while enforcement removes the survival strategies people adopted. The combination creates a population with stable employment, but no legal place to live. Economic growth enriches some while criminalizing others, with RV enforcement serving as the mechanism that removes visible poverty from prosperous areas. This isn't homelessness anymore. It's a slow-motion eviction of the working class. If you've seen this happening in your city, tell us in the comments. And don't miss our next video, where we expose which states are expanding these crackdowns even further.